I thought he wasn't sure. He was not sure. It would be impossible for James Bentley to be sure of anything. He did not listen properly to what Mrs. McGinty was saying. Nevertheless, if James Bentley had an impression that Mrs. McGinty was talking about Mrs. Upwood, it may very well be true. Impressions often are. Our latest information from Australia— it was Australia she went to, by the way, not America— seems to be to the effect that the Mrs. Hope in question died out there 20 years ago. I have already been told that, said Poirot. You always know everything, don't you, Poirot? Poirot took no notice of this jibe. He said, At the one end we have Mrs. Hope, deceased in Australia. And at the other? At the other end we have Mrs. Upwood, the widow of a rich North Country manufacturer. She lived with him near Leeds and had a son. Soon after the son's birth, her husband died. The boy was inclined to be tubercular, and since her husband's death she lived mostly abroad. And when does this saga begin? The saga begins 4 years after Eva Kane left England. Upwood met his wife somewhere abroad, and brought her home after the marriage. So actually Mrs. Upwood could be Eva Kane. What was her maiden name? Hargreaves, I understand. But what's in her name? What indeed? Eva Kane, or Evelyn Hope, may have died in Australia, but she may have arranged the convenient decease and resuscitated herself as Hargreaves, and made a wealthy match. It's all a long time ago, said Spence, but supposing that it's true, supposing she kept a picture of herself, and supposing that Mrs. McGinty saw it, then one can only assume that she killed Mrs. McGinty. That could be, could it not? Robin Upwood was broadcasting that night. Mrs. Rendell mentions going to the cottage that evening, remember, and not being able to make herself heard. According to Mrs. Sweeteman, Janet Groom told her that Mrs. Upwood was not really as crippled as she made out. Well, that's all very well, Poirot, but the fact remains that she herself was killed, after recognizing a photograph. Now, you want to make out that the two deaths are not connected. No, I do not say that. They are connected, all right. I give it up. Evelyn Hope. There is the key to the problem. Evelyn Carpenter? Is that your idea? Not Lily Gamble? But Eva Kane's daughter? But surely she wouldn't kill her own mother. No. This is not matricide. What an irritating devil you are, Poirot. You'll be saying next that Eva Kane and Lily Gamble and Janice Cortland and Vera Blake are all living in Broad Hinny. All 4 suspects. We have more than 4. Eva Kane was the Craigs' nursery governess, remember? Well, what's that got to do with it? Where there is a nursery governess, there must be children, or at least a child. What happened to the Craig children? Well, there was a girl and a boy, I believe. Some relative took them. So, there are 2 more people to take into account. 2 people who might have kept a photograph for the 3rd reason I mentioned. Revenge. I don't believe it, said Spence. Poirot sighed. It has to be considered all the same. I think I know the truth. Though there is one fact that baffles me utterly. I'm glad something baffles you, said Spence. Confirm one thing for me, mon cher Spence. Eva Kane left the country before Craig's execution. That is right? Quite right. And she was, at that time, expecting a child. Quite right. Oh, Dieu! How stupid I have been, said Hercule Poirot. The whole thing is simple, is it not? It was after that remark that there was very nearly a 3rd murder, the murder of Hercule Poirot by Superintendent Spence in Kilchester Police Headquarters. I want, said Hercule Poirot, a personal call to Mrs. Ariadne Oliver. A personal call to Mrs. Oliver was not achieved without difficulties. Mrs. Oliver was working and could not be disturbed. Poirot, however, disregarded all denials. Presently he heard the authoress's voice. It was cross and rather breathless. "Well, what is it?" said Mrs. Oliver. "Have you got to ring me up just now? I've thought of a most wonderful idea for a murder in a draper's shop. You know, the old-fashioned kind that sells combinations and funny vests with long sleeves." "I do not know," said Poirot. "And anyway, what I have to say to you is far more important." "It couldn't be," said Mrs. Oliver. "Not to me, I mean. Unless I get a rough sketch of my idea jotted down, it will go." Hercule Poirot paid no attention to this creative agony. He asked sharp, imperative questions, to which Mrs. Oliver replied somewhat vaguely,